Hello to everybody, welcome to this video in which I want to present my book. It's the recent published book, is this one, of which I'm very proud, of course. It is my first monograph and it is co-authored with Francesco Cavatorta. And the title is Rethinking Islamic Politics in Tunisia, a Gramscian Analysis. The publisher is IB Tauris. So let me, of course, shortly present this book, highlighting two things. That first, this book is the result of a long path of research which started in 2011 and which a good part of it was made with Francesco Cavatorta, who is the co-author of the book. My original contribution to the book, besides in several chapters, is the theoretical frame, while Francesco, he focused more on the chapter 7 here, the chapter 7, which is titled The End of Islamic Politics, which is the last chapter, in which Francesco deals with the comparison between what we call the Islamic politics and the communist parties, which is a topic that Francesco liked very much, that he went to develop more recently, about how the communist ideology in the post-Soviet era became somehow liberal. So, which in Islamic politics terms becomes post-Islamist. That's how we call it. But I want to focus, of course, on my more original contribution, which is also the reason why Torres published us this book, because they wanted us to participate to the new series, which is called Critical Studies on Islamism series. So they accepted this book as being part of a critical approach. This is why rethinking is part of the title. So what is this theoretical original, allegedly, contribution? Let's say first that there are two important theoretical chapters. There are the first two chapters which frame this theoretical and critical approach. The first one, chapter 1, is called Islamic Politics, Islamism, Salafism, and Post-Islamism, in which we define this concept of Islamic politics reflected into the traditional terms of Islamism, Salafism, and post-Islamism. In other words, we explain why do we need to call it Islamic politics instead of the traditional Islamism and Salafism. We will come later on this idea because it is important. And the second chapter is Islamic politics and Gramsci. This is also my original part because I deal with Gramsci. I take from Gramsci a theoretical framework of politics, which I do apply indeed to the Islamic politics. So what is the Islamic politics I propose here? Why not, first of all, Islamism, Islamist politics? Islamism and Islamist is the technical, the traditional way to define this kind of political participation. In this term, it is emphasized that Islamism or Islamist politics is the consequence of social and political contemporary dynamics in which ideology plays a lesser role. Why is it so? It is so because the academia in the past 20 years, or even 30 years in which this field, during which this field has developed, wanted to counter what was established by traditional common sense as an essentialist approach, especially after 9/11. There was this developing idea of Islam as being an essential part of the activities of Muslims, as if Islam plays as something that must inevitably and in an almost deterministic way to a certain behavior which is led by the ideology. So this is what Islamism wanted to counter. But in proposing Islamic politics, we make some nuances to this frame, which we agree more or less. But we say first, by using Islamism, we have a problem that we make a distinction with Salafism. So Islamism traditionally was opposed to Salafism, while for us they are both part of the same dynamics of the Islamic politics. Second, and most importantly, by framing the theoretical frame of Islamic politics, we deal with the idea of ideology. So although we are against this essentialist idea of ideology, we still need that this is a category that should be renewed because it has its own nuances, epistemological nuances that helps a lot to understand certain things. But in order to reuse or reintroduce ideology into the debate, we need Antonio Gramsci. This is the point. So the Islamic politics is a political theology of the praxis, which sounds like Gramsci politics of the practice. So what is the role ideology plays into a politics of the practice? Ideology is, taken from Gramsci and applying to Islamic politics, is that ideological frame which is on one side a vision of the world. So it's much extended the traditional idea of ideology. So it's a Weltanschauung, a vision of the world, but at the same time it is something that leads to action. So there is a dialectic between action and theory of thinking and practicing that thinking. And this ideological frame is not either the classical Marxian frame as false consciousness, but it is a counter-hegemonic vision of the world. So this is where Islamic politics comes instead of Islamism or Salafism. I repeat, to include both Islamism and Salafism, which both are studied in this book, in the example in the case of Tunisia, and also because they want to introduce an idea of how those activists they act according to an ideological frame that works as a counter-hegemonic mind system that brings them to a critical reading of reality and then leads them to action. This action is aimed to transform the world. In this process, of course, there is the idea of organization and the idea of achieving a political goal, which is taking power, of course. Otherwise, that would not be a matter of politics. So, set this theoretical framework, outline this theoretical framework, the book applies it to the case study of Tunisia. So, in Tunisia, as we said, there has been, in the contemporary history of Tunisia, we have three phases, according to this book. The first phase is the construction of the ideology of the nation state. Tunisia appears in the 1956 as an independent state, but it comes out of a process called usually as modernization, during which the idea of the nation is built up. The idea of the nation is both a theoretical process, because the colonization movement is a construction of the idea of the nation, which has to be opposed to the claim of colonization, which wants to deny the existence of this identity. But the process of building up an ideology of the nation is also a practical action in which there are dynamics of conflict, of power within the nationalist movement itself, between the rural countries and the cities, between a new middle class and the Mohammedan and the marginalized people. All this produced two different models of nation. The one linked to a more modernist version, linked to the idea of the West of France, in this case, because Tunisia was a French colonization, there is also an opposite reading which claims the building up of the national ideology around a renewed idea of religion. So the third chapter is Islamic reformism, popular mobilization, and the construction of the modernist ideology in Tunisia. This is the title. Which this title claimed that Islamic reformism is the intellectual process of building up this idea of nation. Popular mobilization is the way the theory become practice, and how new masses, new social and political subjects enter into the scene, and the construction of the modernist ideology is all becomes as the independent Tunisia ideology, which is framed under the modernist frame of what in Tunisia is known as Tunisianité, or in other ways, the way Bourguiba, Habib Bourguiba, becomes framing it. Habib Bourguiba is the founding father of Tunisia. So this ideology becomes the ideology of the new independent states. And based on this, the project, the Islamist project, the first wave of Islamic politics and is an Islamist traditional one, is constructed, let's say, both the Islamist first wave represented by the party Ennahda and the second wave, the Salafist way in the 2000s, are a response, are a counter ideological project against this idea of the nation, which produce a practical action together with a theoretical, political-theological frame. So the chapters goes on in applying the Gramscian model of Islamic politics and studying details. You should read it if you are interested also into the details of the specific Tunisian story of Islamism and Salafism. Studies in detail in chapter 4, Tunisia Ennahda, the movement Ennahda, the first generation of Islamic politics. The chapter is titled The Gramscian Turn in Tunisia, Islamic Politics, Ennahda. So we explain how this process happened, how there is first a process of awareness, theological, political awareness built up around the idea of a revivalist religion, counter-hegemonic revivalist religion, and then we see how this becomes, in the second step, a social mass movement, a third, a political organization. Then, with the same scheme, in chapter 5, we study about Ansar Sharia. Ansar Sharia was really the topic, the central focus of my research during my PhD, my doctorate studies. It is what you will know, Fabio Merone. It's Ansar Sharia. I was studying there. The movement was going up under my eyes. So I was really interested into it. And in the fifth chapter, which is called the second wave of Islamic politics, Ansar Sharia, again, I go back to the three-lateral process of counter-hegemonic political theological building, which is also a process of a new awareness according to political theological categories, and then social mass movement, so movement that is born from below, and finally the organization, the typical political project. In this approach, there is also a critique into the distinction between politics and preaching to religious and politics, which is usually made when studying Islamist or Salafist movement. In this case, this book proposes a reading of the politics where the religion has always a political dimension. So there is not a so strict differentiation. But this differentiation happens according to the literature of the parties. In this case, we call of post-Islamist parties. So when this division between religion and politics, it happens, it is indeed a renunciation, according to this book, to the Islamic politics. Islamic politics is transformative, is activist, is revolutionary in a sense. When it becomes this division between politics and religion, the religion is put aside because the religion represents also the social religious movement. So there is this taking off the transformative side of the politics, the Islamic politics, in order to accepting a way of doing politics which is only participating to the institutions, to the government, in a sense, in a technique, with a technicality definition politics, in which doing politics means dealing with the daily affair of the government. In fact, renouncing to transform reality, adapting the praxis to liberalism. This is post-Islamism, is indeed the abandonment of the ideological transformative side in favor of a technical, liberal or neoliberal acceptance, exactly what happened with the communist parties after the fall of the Soviet Union. This is indeed the 7th chapter I was mentioning, which is Francesco focusing on more. So I thank you for listening to this video. You may want to read the book or being interested to the topics or being curious only. Thank you. I see you next time.